This is another story time. This is the story of Franky. Franky, also known as Cunning Flam. So Franky um, was born and then, he was left on an island called Water 7, you know, where the whole, Ennie's arc, started at, Water 7 at, I don't know, age 10 or 12 or something like that. He was a young boy and shit. He was young boy when that happened. And there he met a shipwright named Tom and Iceberg, and they were guys who created ships. And Franky, well, they found Franky building, different type of ships. Franky always had a um, thing for designing, things, and they taught him how to be a shipwright. And he was, making different, water, you know, vessels and other things, and they were like, oh, this kid is, gifted in that type of thing. We want to help him out. And they were doing that shit for years. Kokoro was there too. Granny Kokoro would come around and be like, hey, you guys are, fixing people's ships and shit. And they're like, yeah. And they had fun. Iceberg and, Franky were, rivals, who's better at building ships. And, putting them together, you know, repairing ships, you know. They were doing that shit together for a long time. However, things changed one day when the government came. And they were like, Tom is a shipbuilder, right? He designed the ship that Gold Roger sailed on, the Oro Jackson. He designed that ship, you know, and because of him designing that ship for Gold Roger, he became known as King of the Pirates, giving us a lot of headache as the world government, that organization, that everybody in the world gets called to, to some degree. And they were like, they were looking for Tom so they could take him to Ennie's lobby and get his head chopped off. But he also knew about Pluton too, um, blueprints to create one of the ancient weapons. So they were there to fuck him up, fuck their day up. And Franky wasn't having it. He's like, you can't take Tom. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just doing his job. He was doing what he loved to do. And see, Tom was a fishman too. Tom, he, they took him, and then, the sea train was going towards Ennie's lobby, and Frankie was standing on the fucking he was standing on the railroad tracks, and he got boom smashed, and that's when he became after that day he became a cyborg. Um, he repaired himself. I think is if I remember correctly, he repaired himself. He gave himself robotic, arms, and he became a cyborg from that day on, and that's how he survived. Shit's crazy. I have no idea. He tried to, oh my God, Frankie. He tried to stop that shit from leaving to Ennie's lobby, but he couldn't stop it. And unfortunately, Tom died and other things, and then Iceberg and Frankie went their own ways. Iceberg started a galley law company, which was a place where shipwrights work on ships and repair ships and build ships for people, and then Frankie was just running his own little gang on the out called the Franky family, and they were just playing games, having fun when they could and other stuff, acting the ass and other shit. But eventually, and this is years later, but the Triads show up, and they need a new ship. Frankie's around and he finds Usopp. Usopp has money. He's like, damn, this is cool. I like this money. And then he had his people beat up Usopp because Usopp was trying to get the money back. Then later on, Luffy found out that Usopp got his ass whooped by these guys, and then Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper went in there and they cleaned house. They fucked with the Franky family, and then Franky was like, they were like, big bro, you know, they kicked our ass. And he was like, damn, that Straw Hat. And then Franky and Luffy ended up fighting in the streets. You know, before they found out some other shit um, about the CP9 members and then the world government finding Franky's dick. See, later on, they find that out because Usopp had left the crew, right? Because he tried to fight Luffy. And then they were, or Usopp was like, yo, can you please, help me, repair the Going Merry? He looked at it, he said, man, and like they weren't lying to you, man, but that ship won't sail, but only one more voyage, to the next island, and that's it. And he said, I don't care. Usopp said, you know, if she can sail one more time, that'll be enough for me. And he was like, all right, well, that's cool then, I guess. I'll help you, with that. And as he was helping him out with that, CP9 showed up. And he was like, well, who the fuck are you guys? And they were like, we're, Cypher Pool agents. And we know that you know about the blueprints of Pluton. He said, what? And he's like, they were like, they used the word cunning flam. He said, nobody's called me that shit in years. You guys are finding my dick a bit too hard. You gotta calm the fuck down. You know? And, then they like took him, chained him up. They're like, you're gonna die, just like Tom did at Ennie's lobby. Like, you'll go through the gates of justice, and then they'll take you to Marineford and get your head chopped off. And then he was like, oh man. And he was caught with Nico Robin. Then, the Straw Hats were like on the move to save him. Well, mostly to save Robin. And then the Franky family went with Luffy, and they were like, yo, we gotta save our big bro. And they were like, okay, you can come with us. And they made it to Ennie's lobby, right? And at Ennie's lobby, Frankie was there, and he was with Nico Robin. He was like, are you really okay with, dying and getting your head chopped off? Because I know I ain't. And he even noted that the island was fucking crazy because it had a hole in it. He was like, what the hell? This hole in the island. Um, like, how the fuck did that happen and other stuff? And this, Ennie's lobby's like in the middle of this, like, hole. It's I don't know. It was one of the ancient weapons that did it, I think. Um, but he was there, and then the Straws showed up, and they were like, Luffy was like, "Yo, do you want to live?" He told her, asked Robin, and she said, "I want to live." And then Frankie ended up getting free, because Chopper and all them came through. He got himself free, and he was fighting against a guy named Fukuro. Fukuro had a zipper for a mouth. Fukuro was kind of fast for his size too, and he could he was going pound for pound, blow for blow with Frankie. Frankie was using strong, strong right, strong hammer, weapons left, but he didn't have enough cola in him, so he's like, oh fuck, I have to find some cola. And then he was like, Chopper was trying to help him find some cola, and he found him some cola, and then he shot him out of the outside of the tower, and then he was gonna fall into the water. And Kumador, or not Kumador, but Fukuro was gonna fall into the water, and then Frankie was like, oh. I have to, shit, I have to, save myself, and he's, Fukuro tried to, spin Frankie off of him, spin him around, but then Frankie, countered, balanced that or whatever, and, basically killed his momentum, and he was like, huh, what? And then Frankie, shot him into the ground with the polar burst. He said, boom. And he went deep in the ground. Fukuro went deep. And he defeated Fukuro, and then he stopped. He stopped Chopper from going on the rampage. He was like, "Hey man, you gotta calm the fuck down," And then he found Nico Robin when he was trying to run past Lucci, and Lucci found him real quick, and he was like, hit him. He hit him in the stomach like a couple times, like 10 times, like really quick, with one hand, like, and he was like, "You might have defeated Fukuro, but I am, more powerful than he is." And then Luffy was like, kicked him to the curb and said, "Yo, go get Robin." And he was like, "I got you. I'm on my way." And he was able to, hit spawn him and then free Nico Robin, and then Nico Robin cracked his back. And then he was just, a witness to watching Luffy, fight this, guy named Rob Lucci, um, to a fight. And that shit was, intense. Like I said, it was like one of the best fights. I said it was Luffy's best fight. As far as, what was on the line and everything, and Luffy like was not having. It wasn't an easy fight. But he was able to defeat him, and then everybody went back to Water 7 after the Mary was, burned, and they said farewell. But Frankie was like, "Cool, it's all right. We got other ship that, I can build for you." And he was like, "I'll build this ship for them, and then they'll leave." But the thing was, Frankie had a bounty at that point, the cyborg Frankie, and I think his bounty was like 36 or 38 million. And he was like, "Oh, fuck. Um, Now I have a bounty. They'll be after my dick now, I guess." And he was like, "Yeah, um, they will be after." Like, yeah, they will be after. But he was building the um, Thousand Sunny. He put in a lot of things. Like he even considered, little boat things, like little wave riders or whatever. And they had the head of the Mary on it, in memory of the Going Mary. And then he had like other things, like a whole bunch of shit that Frankie, designed for the ship. Um, and like he could fly too. And it was, propelled by Cola, to get him the fuck out of there once Garp was like hunting their dick. And he was like, "I guess I'll be a pirate because I already have a bounty. They're finding my dick. And Straw Hat Luffy ain't that bad of a guy. And I'll see him to the end of his journey, because it sounds cool." And that's what Tom would have wanted to do too. So, I might as well do it. And then he left with the Straw Hats. And then they got to Thriller Bark and they met a skeleton named Brooke. And they were like, "Okay, we have to help this guy find his shadow." He's like, "All right, man, I'll help you find your shadow." And he was, running around with Brooke. And then Brooke was like, "Hey, this guy is, powerful. This is Ryuma. He's, this and that." He's like, "Just step back and let me try to get my shadow back." And then um, Brooke was defeated. And then, him and Frankie and Brooke were almost, gonna get caught. But then Zoro showed up. And Zoro had to fight against Ryuma. Frankie was there. He was fighting against Moria and Oars for a little bit, like as a crew, not contributing too much to the fight. But then Kuma appeared, and when Kuma appeared, he was like, "This guy has paws for an attack. This guy can't do that. He can't. He can't do damage like that. This guy is a joke." And he got hit by like one of his pad cannons, and he was like, he got fucked up. Like he was like done after that. And then that was him during Thriller Bark. They got to the island of Sabaody, and they were looking for um, Kami, and he went to the slave auction with the rest of the crew, and he was sent to find the key to her like necklace, because it was like on a timer. So like once it started clicking, like it was like a bomb, so slaves couldn't escape. So he had to look for the keys, and he was running around looking for the keys. However, they didn't know about Rayleigh and armament hockey. back then. So Rayleigh was like, okay, there's no in hockey is, able enough to like break the it was able to break the restraints on her neck. So then Frankie found the key and he was like, damn, like I found these keys for no reason. And it was like, oh, Rayleigh was like, oh, sorry about that. Then they all ran back to Rayleigh's place and they were like, um, yeah, man, I used to sell with Gold Roger and all this other stuff. And he was like, damn, that's cool. Um, said, um, hey, excuse me, can I get the chips and queso, large chips and queso? Yeah. So that happened, right? And they left Rayleigh's house. Once they left Rayleigh's house, Kuma showed up. As Kuma showed up, it was over. They got separated. Frankie was one of the last ones to get shot out. Luffy was like, no. And he lost all his crew members, but Frankie got shot off to an island. These people knew about a doctor, the smartest mind in the world, called Dr. Vegapunk. And there was these people there that knew about his creations and other shit, right? Um, However, Frankie was like, yeah. And he kind of lost his personality because he started drinking tea instead of cola. He started to sound more sophisticated and very, like, British type. And that kid was like, that was there, was like, this guy's not cool. Like he was when he first got here. Saying super and all that shit that Frankie does. I'm feeling super today. That shit wasn't happening. Once he took some cola, he started to sound more like an American, and he's like, all right, trying to bust some heads and other things. But he got the message from Luffy, but they were not going to meet in 3 days, but in 2 years. So he trained for 2 years. Basically, him training was him giving himself some upgrades. Franklin came back, he was like bigger. Like, even more of a cyborg than he was before. When they go to Fisherman Island, when he's fighting, he uses a move called Radical Beam. That was to eliminate a whole bunch of threats. Eliminate a whole lot of threats out there. I don't. chase with women. Um, it ain't me, but that happened, right? And then he was able to destroy a whole bunch of fishmen, and then they left Fishman Island and made it towards Punk Hazard. And at Punk Hazard, Franky got off the ship with Nami, Sanji, and Chopper. They all got their bodies switched around, like their soul swap. And Franky was inside of Chopper's body, and then Nami was inside of Franky's body. And when Franky was inside of Chopper's body, he didn't know how to control the monster point. So the monster point went crazy. He was like, going crazy like Chopper did before the time skip. Luffy had to like knock his ass the fuck out. Then Trafalgar Law changed them back to who they were. Franky was helping these kids get away, who were being drugged by that bitch called Caesar. And, he saved them. And Luffy defeated Caesar, Law defeated Virgo, and they got the fuck out of there. And Franky was on Dressrosa. And in Dressrosa, Franky, running around in disguise with Luffy for a little bit. Then he met some Totadas, and, he was told to, take down the Smile Factory that was on Dressrosa. And he did. There were some Totanas that were slaves there, right? They were working. And it's like, I have to free these Totanas as well. And the funny things about the Tontata people, they were like small, like this small. They were like really strong, like really like physically strong. And they could like carry shit. They were being used as slave labor. Franky had to fight against a guy named Senior Pink, who had a sad backstory. It's like, damn, bro, after you told me about your fucked up past, sad backstory, I don't feel like fighting you, but I have to because, I have a mission and I have to, destroy this, place. And they fought, and Franky ended up defeating him. The place was made out of sea prism stone. So when Doflamingo put the birdcage up, they had to I don't know. They were trying to stop the place. No, they were trying to stop Dressrosa from being crushed and destroyed by the strings because it was a birdcage. So it was closing in on itself. And as it was closing in on itself, these strings were like destroying shit, ripping shit apart. Because Doflamingo strings are so strong, you know, they're able to like rip through, concrete. And that happens. But that happened, and they were able to stop. Well, Luffy was able to stop Doflamingo before the whole all of Dressrosa was destroyed. But when they repaired Dressrosa, I believe they did build a statue of Franky too, because he helped free the Totata people. Franky got on the ship with Luffy, and they got to Zoe. And when they got to Zoe, they made plans with Trafalgar Law that they will meet in the land of Wano. Franky was part of the group that went to Wano. So in Wano, Franky was like a guy who helped prepare, houses. And he was also letting the other samurai know it was time to not fuck around no more. And Wano was soon gonna be free from Kaido's clutches. He said, "Cool, it's fine. Hey, y'all niggas gotta find us and other things. We have the moon shaped, tattooed on our ankle. We'll meet in Curie or whatever, and raid Onigashima. Once people arrive and other things. That person being Luffy. Now Luffy showed up, and then cool. They all met up in Curie and other things, and then Kaido shot a blast out of his mouth, and Luffy thought that his crew was destroyed, and then he tried to fight Kaido. Kaido took Luffy to the Udon prison, and he was there. While Zoro was running around and shit. Sanji was, and Franky was trying to get shit together for the raid on Onigashima. On raid on Onigashima, he infiltrated Onigashima with the rest of the crew, and the person he had to fight was Sasaki. This guy was a dinosaur fruit user. He ate the model, Triceratops, and he was fighting against Franky. Franky had a decent fight against this guy. Franky was able to, take this man down. Yeah. Slammed him, throw him around, used the radical beam. Hey, Franky radical beam. He tried to use the General Franky on him. His little, machine that he liked to hop into, but he hopped out of it and he shot him with the radical beam. And he was like, "Oh," he defeated him. Then he went down to help down at the, with everybody else, fight against the Kaido pirates or the Beast pirates. As Luffy was fighting, Kaido. Luffy defeated Kaido and the land of Wano was saved. When Franky got his new bounty, I think it was I don't know. It didn't go up that much. I think it went to 300 million or 400 million. It was one of the lower ones. I think Usopp had a higher bounty than he did. But they were on their way to Egghead, and he was so ecstatic because guess what? Dr. Vegapunk lives on Egghead Island, and he has that's his island, that's his place, that's where he does all of his research, that's where he does all of his experiments. futuristic type of island. But it really wasn't futuristic. It was I told him, and it's the ancient kingdom was actually more advanced than what they were today. You know, and it was like, damn, really? And Frankie got other things. Frankie was gonna help the crew. Everybody was gonna help Vegapunk escape the island, and that's where it's at right now in the anime. But stay cool on the corner because Frankie is super. He's feeling super right now, cooling on the corner. That's what I heard in through the shop